Hi everyone, I'm Zeke, and today I have a healing guide for Hades Extreme. In this guide, I'll be running you through all of your healing responsibilities in this encounter. This guide is intended to be an all-in-one guide for healers, so I'll be covering not only what mechanics you need to do as a healer, but also what damage to be looking out for, and which health bars to pay attention to. For those of you who need help planning out your healing cooldowns for the fight, I'll also make some class-specific healing suggestions. Let's get started. The first important mechanic of the fight is Shadow Spread. Shadow Spread hits each player with a conal AoE, so each member of the party needs to spread out around the boss to avoid getting hit twice. These AoEs will hit a second time a few seconds later, so make sure you slide over to an available safe spot to avoid getting hit. It's possible to survive multiple hits with a timely heal or enough mitigation, but I wouldn't recommend it since the mechanic is straightforward to dodge. It's up to you if you want to immediately heal Shadow Spread. Much of the work can be done pre-pull with skills like Adlo Deploy or Nocturnal Aspected Helios. You can also weave skills into your opener to help with the damage, like Asylum, Whispering Dawn, and Earthly Star. While the party doesn't necessarily need the healing immediately, it's nice to have them topped off for Bad Faith, the next mechanic. When Hades casts Bad Faith, two purple walls with spikes appear on his sides. He will then cleave the two quadrants the spikes are pointing at. A second or two later, he will follow this with a second cleave, hitting the original safe quadrants. Make sure you move back into the new safe spot once the cast bar finishes. If you fail to dodge this mechanic, you'll take about 3/4 of your health and damage, which can kill you if you're still low from Shadow Spread. Next is Ravenous Assault, his 2-hit tank buster. This deals moderate damage and applies magic vulnerability on the first hit. To handle this, the tanks will either need the swap, or the main tank will need to use an invuln. Generally, if your tanks choose the swap, the tank buster deals a pretty small amount of damage, leaving your tanks at comfortably high health. However, if your tank uses an invuln like Holmgang, be prepared to immediately heal him back after the second hit of the tank buster in anticipation of the upcoming auto attacks. Hades then uses Arcane Utterance, which will spawn either red spheres or blue panels. In both of these cases, you need to look at the pattern the objects present and move to the corresponding safe spot. For the red spheres, each of the spheres will detonate in a circular AoE around itself. The outer ring of red spheres will be missing a sphere, which is your safe spot. If you get the blue panels, they spawn in a similar configuration with one of the outer panels missing. However, each of these panels has a lighter, glowing side and a darker side. Each of the panels will shoot a laser straight from its glowing side across the room. As a result, the safe spot is opposite of the red sphere's case. Look for the missing panel and move to the opposite side of the room from it. Alternatively, look at the panel in the center of the room and move directly back from its backside. Now, Hades will cast Broken Faith, which rains down meteors on 9 different spots on the arena. These meteors explode in a larger area than they initially indicate, so use the circles carved into the arena's floor to estimate the size of their explosions. These mechanics require quite a bit of movement, so try not to tunnel vision too hard during this phase. For white mages and astrologians, Regen and Aspected Benefic are perfect tools for keeping the main tank's health high while simultaneously allowing you to move. Be aware that he continues to auto-attack throughout this mechanic. Be prepared to heal chip damage on players who get caught out by meteors, since mistakes are common during this phase, and 2 hits will lead to a death. Instant heals like Essential Dignity, Afflatus Solus, Tetra, Excog, and Lustrate are all great for this section. An alternative strategy for this section is to keep the party in the center of the room and to heal and mitigate through the meteor damage. Provided the party stays close to the center, the group will get hit twice by the meteors, needing a moderate amount of healing between the hits to live comfortably. This is the heaviest source of AoE damage in the first phase, so feel free to be fairly liberal with your cooldowns. For astrologians, this can be a comfortable place to set up Earthly Star, and you can also get good value out of Collective Unconscious and Celestial Opposition. For white mages, this can be an ideal time to burn your lilies via some combination of Rapture, Plenary Indulgence, Medica 2, and Assize. Scholars can get a lot of value from pretty much any of their fairy abilities. Whispering Dawn, Fey Illumination, and Consolation are all good here. After this, Hades will cast Arcane Utterance again, which will give you the opposite dodging mechanic of earlier. If you had the red spheres before, you'll have the blue panels now, and vice versa. Move to the appropriate safe spot to dodge. Hades will begin to repeat mechanics now, so be ready for another Shadow Spread, Bad Faith, and Ravenous Assault. Please note that if your group chose to take 2 vuln stacks by staying in the middle for Broken Faith, everyone needs to be topped for Shadow Spread, as it will do extremely heavy damage. If he is not pushed to under 10% health by the end of these mechanics, he will enrage, wiping the party. In the second phase, you'll do battle with Nabrialis, who immediately begins casting Quake 3, which is a pseudo-enrage. The more health he has when he finishes casting, the more damage Quake will do. I'll come back to healing this later. At the beginning of the phase, the tanks are responsible for each taking 4 meteor towers, while the DPS point their tethers away from the group. There are 2 sets of meteor towers, and when the tank soaks one, he takes a considerable amount of damage. As a healer, you aren't responsible for doing any mechanics here, so your job is to stand in the middle of the arena, out of harm's way, and keep a close eye on both tanks. Both tanks need heavy single-target healing during this phase. As a regen healer, it can be a good idea to place regens on both of the tanks. Be ready to augment this healing with Cure 2, Solace, and Benefic 2. As an Astro, Sinistry plus Benefic 2 is extremely powerful here. Be very liberal with your healing. If a tank dies before all the meteors are soaked, it'll almost always lead to a group wipe. Don't be afraid to use things like Benediction if things look spicy. As a Scholar, this is the perfect opportunity to dump your Fairy Gauge on Fey Union. Don't forget to use Excog on a tank if you have the stacks. If you're actively communicating with your co-healer, dividing responsibility between you can be helpful here. For example, you can volunteer to use your resources on one of the tanks, while your co-healer handles the other. This can prevent situations in which one tank gets overhealed while the other one dies. Now, 2 stack markers will appear, one on each healer. Make sure you spread out from your other healer so that the stack markers don't overlap. The stacks give you magic vuln, meaning that if you get clipped by both, it's an instant death. While the stacks don't do that much damage, Quake 3 comes immediately after and will typically deal very heavy damage. Be prepared to retop the party immediately after the stacks so that you have enough health to eat Quake 3. Instant heals like Rapture and Indom are good here, as well as prepared heals like Earthly Star. If you're looking for a good star timing, if you place a star about 5 to 10 seconds after the second phase starts, it'll naturally detonate here. As I mentioned before, Quake 3 deals damage proportional to Nabrialis' remaining health. If he's at 20 or 25% health, it'll do pretty heavy damage, but nothing you can't handle with a full health bar. If you're more in the 30 to 40% range, you probably need some mitigation in addition to being full health. Be prepared to shield with Succor or Aspected Helios, and to mitigate with Sacred Soil and Collective Unconscious. Use the downtime before the next phase to retop the party. Now you'll face off against La Habrea and Aegiorm. La Habrea will begin the phase by casting Fire Sphere, and Aegiorm will cast Blizzard Sphere. When the cast complete, you'll take moderate raid-wide damage, and each party member will be given either a Fire or Ice brand debuff. If you have a Fire brand, you can only attack Aegiorm, and if you have an Ice brand, you can only attack La Habrea. During this phase, the tanks will spread out the bosses to make sure that they don't tether to each other. A few seconds later, 4 Ascian ghosts spawn, tethering players with either an Ice tether or a Fire tether. If a player takes a tether that is the same color as their debuff, they will take lethal damage. As such, the 4 tethers need to be taken by players with opposite debuffs. There are 2 things to note here. The first is that the tethers always spawn in the same configuration. For example, there will always be 1 fire and 1 ice tether to the north, and 1 of each element to the south. Additionally, the 2 healers will always have different debuffs. What this means is that the 2 healers can handle a pair of tethers fairly easily. One common strategy will have the healers responsible for the southern tethers. In this case, either the healers will take the southern tether close to their boss, or they'll switch places and take the tether closer to the opposite boss. The tethers explode in a medium-sized AoE for a moderate amount of damage, so make sure you're safely away from your party when the tethers go off. While you're busy handling the tethers, La Habrea and Aegiorm will use Fire 4 and Blizzard 4, their respective tank busters. For safety, you can have regens, Excog, and Fey Union prepared for the tanks, or you can look to apply regens and instant heals while on the move. As long as the tanks live the tank busters with around half their health, you can ignore them for the time being, as there's something more important that's about to happen. Immediately after the tethers explode, the bosses will begin casting Fire Sphere and Blizzard Sphere, dealing moderate damage and swapping your debuffs. Make sure that you move back to the center of the room so that you can hit your entire party with AoE heals in preparation for this. Instant cast spells like Rapture and Indom are great here. Now that your debuffs have swapped, you need to start hitting the other boss, as the original one is now invulnerable to your attacks. This is the last instance of AoE damage during this part, so take a moment to take care of your tanks, who are probably low after the Tank Buster and Raid Buster damage. To conclude this phase, the bosses continue the auto attack and will cast additional Fire 4 and Blizzard 4 tank busters. Keep an eye on your tank's health bars while focusing damage on your boss. After this, get ready for Ascian Prime. Ascian Prime leads off his phase with Universal Manipulation. This mechanic hits ridiculously hard, so use whatever mitigation and healing buffs you have available. Universal Manipulation gives 3 debuffs to each player. The tanks and healers always receive Doom, Ancient Circle, and Cursed Shriek. To cleanse Doom, you need to be healed to 100% HP. Your second debuff, Ancient Circle, places a donut AoE around you, which will cause lethal damage to any player it hits. Finally, Curse Shriek places a glare mechanic above your character, petrifying any party member who fails to look away when it resolves. While there are many ways of handling this mechanic, I'll outline one that is fairly simple. Have each of the tanks and healers stand on the boss in a cardinal position. Have a DPS stand behind each of these players. When the mechanic begins to resolve, the DPS will be reduced to 1 HP and knocked away from you. Make sure to turn away towards the outside of the arena to dodge the petrifies coming from your co-healer and tanks. Your biggest responsibility during this mechanic is preparing mitigation for it and then healing the tanks and healers back to full. You can get a head start on this healing by mitigating universal manipulation properly. Every bit of damage you mitigate is that much less damage you'll have to heal here. Many mitigation tools double as healing tools as well, so try to have things like Temperance, Neutral Sect, and Sacred Soil up here. During the long cast bar of universal manipulation, try to put together a plan to do massive healing immediately after the mechanic hits. On White Mage, this might look something like Plenary Indulgence, followed by Cure 3 and Rapture. You can also place Asylum down here, as it gives both you and your co-healer a 10% healing boost. As an Astro, I'd recommend some combination of Earthly Star, Collective Unconscious, and Horoscope plus Neutral Sect Aspected Helios. If you place a star right after the previous two bosses die, it'll naturally detonate here. As a Scholar, you can shield the group before the boss is targetable with some combination of Succor, Adlo Deploy, and Consolation, and you can follow the hit with an Emergency Tactic Succor and an Indom. At the end of the mechanic, Ascian Prime will cast Blight, dealing moderate raid-wide damage as well as inflicting a fairly hefty bleed that lasts for 30 seconds. Remember that your DPS have been reduced to 1 HP from universal manipulation, so encourage them to stack with the party for healing. Be wary of using skills like Cure 3 here. If a DPS doesn't make it in time, they'll miss the heal. Remember that the DPS are the most vulnerable here, so look to cater your heals to their positioning. Be ready to correct their health bars if needed with instant heals. In terms of healing Blight, regens are your best friend. Asylum and Sacred Soil are great here, as well as Medica 2 and Aspected Helios. The boss will now cast Height of Chaos, a tank buster that deals relatively heavy damage. Note that this tank buster splashes, so try to be cognizant of your tank's positioning here. I've seen many healers tunnel too hard on healing just to die the splash damage. Now, the boss will cast Megiddo Flame, summoning 2 linear stack markers. Make sure the healers spread out and take the stacks with an appropriate number of party members. The same positions from the stack earlier in the fight will also work here. Bear in mind that Blight has been on the party for quite a while. Look to refresh your Medica 2 and Aspected Helios regens. The stacks are immediately followed by a Shadow Flare, dealing even more raid-wide damage. Generally, the combination of the bleed and the stacks leave the party dangerously low here, so prepare some burst healing to retop the party. After this, be sure to dodge Ancient Eruption puddles that appear under your party members. Provided you haven't killed him already, Ascian Prime will hit you with several more hits of Shadow Flare before he enrages. In Phase 3, each of Hades' cast bars will correspond to a combination of mechanics. He will begin with Again the Majestic, summoning the same 2 sets of tank meteor towers from Phase 2. As before, keep a very close eye on your tank's health, as a single missed meteor will wipe the group. During this phase, a healer will be tagged with an orange marker. If you get marked, run away from the group as well as the tanks. Anyone hit by this marker will be put into a jail, which the group needs the DPS down before Hades finishes his Chorus of the Lost cast. Remember that the tank meteors are going off during this whole phase, so if you're the healer not selected by the jail, all healing responsibility falls to you until your co-healer is freed. The tank meteors fall slower in this phase than earlier, so don't forget about your tanks. Conversely, because the damage is intermittent, single target regens are even more effective than before. The next mechanic is again the Martyr. A stack marker will be placed on each healer, and a blizzard marker will be put on each of the DPS. A few seconds after the cast bar, the party will be knocked away from the middle. Have 1 tank stack with each healer, while the DPS get knocked back in different directions. This way, the healers and the tanks take the stack markers, while avoid being hit by the ice. Note that it's possible to eat the stack markers solo as a healer, provided you have mitigation like Temperance, so this can add another added layer of safety. Once you've completed this mechanic, get ready for again the abyssal celebrant. During this mechanic, each healer will again be marked with a linear stack marker, and ground AoE similar to Shadow Spread appear on the floor. Healers should take their stacks to the eastern and westernmost safe spots, and their paired tanks should follow them. 2 DPS will be marked and drop bleed puddles, and should stay out of the stacks. The other 2 DPS ideally join the stack markers, but you can live the damage if it's only split between you and the tank. The line stacks will hit 3 times, dealing heavy damage if you only have 2 people in the stack, and moderate damage if you have 3. This is the last major damage of the phase, so there's no need to skimp out on healing cooldowns like Earthly Star and Sacred Soil, even if only half the group is going to get value out of it. Once the arena begins to clear up, Hades will cast Dark Seal, followed by either Polydegman's Purgation or Shadow Stream. Dark Seal spawns glowing orbs on the arena, which will expand and deal damage if they touch you. While staying away from these orbs, stand in the center column of the arena to dodge Polydegman's Purgation or get to the sides to avoid Shadow Stream. Regardless of which mechanic he does, he'll always follow it up with the other one, so get ready to move to the opposite safe spot. He will then do another Dark Seal and then the opposite combination of mechanics. Dodge as necessary while avoiding the expanding orbs. Eventually you'll have pushed his health low enough to enter the final phase. The final phase serves as a damage and healing check and doesn't have too many difficult mechanics. Shortly after the phase starts, Hades uses Dark Current, summoning 2 sets of Exaflares. One set comes from the east and moves west, and the other starts from the west and moves east. Together, the paths these Exaflares take cover the entire arena. To dodge them, move towards either the east or west set of Exaflares, and move into the trail of one of the Exaflares as it passes you. If you stay in this spot, you'll be safe from the Exaflares coming from the other side. A second set of Exaflares will now appear on each side. Make sure to dodge into these as well, or else you'll get hit by the set coming from the other side. As you return to the middle of the arena, Hades will use Gigantomachy, dealing relatively heavy raid-wide damage. He then follows this with Quadra Strike. He slashes twice, dealing a moderate amount of damage on each strike. 2 towers spawn to the east and west, which should be taken by the tanks. He'll smash his hands down on the tanks for a fair amount of damage. He'll then pause for a moment before hitting you with the last hit of Quadra Strike, dealing a large amount of damage and inflicting a heavy bleed. In total, Quadra Strike does a pretty ridiculous amount of damage, but the breaks in between the hits make it relatively easy to heal, as long as you have enough mana. Make sure to retop the party after the first 2 Quadra Strike hits in preparation for the last hit and bleed. This is the biggest source of damage this phase, so feel free to burn any available mitigation and healing cooldowns for Quadra Strike and Gigantomachy as they come up. Don't worry too much about the tanks here. The AoE healing you're doing should be enough to keep them healthy. After this, the mechanics will repeat one more time. There will be another Dark Current summoning Exaflares, and another Gigantomachy followed by Quadra Strike. Make sure to give your party some regens after the 4th Quadra Strike hit to counteract the bleed. Similar to Blight, this bleed lasts for a ridiculous duration, so keep an eye on the party. The Exaflare puddles from Dark Current do a considerable amount of damage, but generally it won't kill a player from full health. However, if they've lost some of it to bleed, it can result in a death. The bleeds last for the entire second Dark Current phase. Encourage your group to all go to the same side and try to heal proactively to mitigate the mechanical errors you or the rest of the party might make while dodging. Oftentimes, you'll have some stuff left over here. As an Astro, you can use Horoscope plus Aspected Helios to heal up after Quadra Strike and trigger Horoscope later once the party's health has had some time to get worn down. As a White Mage, burn Rapture stacks for movement as you dodge Exaflares. As a Scholar, look to use Whispering Dawn and Consolation as they come up from earlier parts in the fight. Do all you can to heal proactively here. After all, you want the party top for the second Gigantomachy and Quadra Strike that follows. After the second Quadra Strike, Hades will channel a very, very lengthy enrage. Don't forget about the huge bleed on the party. Make sure to keep regens applied, and don't you dare let anyone bleed out. Hopefully, if your final phase DPS hasn't been too rocky, you'll have earned yourself a Hades clear. Thank you all for watching. As always, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have comments on this video or suggestions for the next one, leave a comment. I'll see you all next time.